communication that matters to you, both as training officers and as employees of the federal government. It's often considered one of those soft skills, writing and communication in general, but it couldn't be any more crucial than it is, especially today when there's been a lot of movement in the positions that many of your colleagues are filling. So Joy, if I could ask you to take down your screen, I can go ahead and put mine up.
Of course.
Thank you.
There you go.
All right. I was enjoying seeing the chat and getting a chance to see where everybody is coming from all over the country. All right. Bear with me here, folks, while I get my slideshow up and running, and then let's dive in. Here we are. Okay. So as Joy said, we're going to be talking about plain language. We're going to be talking about AI and the opportunities that we have in both to be better, stronger, more effective communicators, and also create opportunities for our networks and for our colleagues, for our agencies and offices to also be better communicators. So our agenda looks like this. We're going to talk about plain writing, the Plain Writing Act of 2010, why we care and how we do it, and then we'll dive into AI. We have built into this slideshow a couple of poll questions, just an opportunity for you to do a little bit of reflection throughout our conversation. At the very end of my presentation, we'll open up for questions. So if you have questions, do please hold on to them and we'll be able to get to them at the very end. And I look forward to that opportunity for us to dig deeper into anything that you'd like to think more about. So we begin with the concept of plain writing. What is plain writing? What are we talking about when we talk about plain writing? It's not necessarily a new concept. In fact, it's more than 100 years old, but for a long time, about 100 years, well, I shouldn't say 100 years, maybe 80 years, it has not necessarily been a concept that we thought about when we were considering what government writing is and what government writing should be. We also call plain writing plain language. And if you can hang on to that poll for just a second, thank you. Plain language, plain English, they all do refer to the same concept, and that is a conversational writing style. That's what we mean when we talk about plain writing. We talk about conversational English. When we dig even further into the definition of plain writing, what we mean is that this is communication that your audience can understand the first time they read it or hear it, meaning they don't have to go back and reread or think harder about what it is that you're intending to say to them or look harder for what they're looking for. It means that your writing is clear, concise, well organized, and follows other best practices appropriate to the field or to your intended audience. So as I noted before, writing in plain language means that when someone reads a document, whether it's an SOP or a policy, procedure, they're able to find what they need, understand it the first time, and use it to meet their needs. Writing in plain language is now following, well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me just note here that effective communication is part of plain language. It, in fact, comes from using plain language and allows us the foundation that we need for strong supervisory skills. The situation that we are in right now with so much movement in the federal government means that people are taking on roles they haven't had before. They are covering down for roles that they did not expect to have to cover down on, which means supervisory skills that may have been uh, being built on a certain career trajectory are now put into hyperdrive, so to speak. And so the need to learn those skills begins and ends with your ability to communicate, which allows you stronger collaboration and team building, and of course, change management, which is what we're all about these days. So, in order to have this conversation about plain language, I've just defined it, but I am curious to know how many of you are familiar with the Plain Writing Act of 2010. And we can go ahead and put that poll question up and just go ahead and click on whether the answer is yes or no. That allows us to get practicing on using poll questions. I guess I need to answer it as well.
And right now, 82 have responded. So right now you're at 82% yes and 18% no.
Okay, all right, this is great news. I'm going to go with that most people are familiar with the Plain Writing Act of 2010. And so we know that it is now law and has been for 15 years that we use plain language when we communicate with members of the public. And the intent of that law was also to ensure that we were communicating with each other using plain language as well. Noting the pull quote from the purpose for the Plain Writing Act of 2010 that the intention was to improve the effectiveness and accountability of all of us to the public. And again, I note that the law specifically notes that the product, the written product, is for the public. However, because what we write is all public record, and because what we know is that plain writing is easier to process, easier to access, the intent really was to get rid of what we call gobbledygook or bureaucraties or any of those other handles that we've used before to describe government writing. The unfortunate hallmark of government writing has been for decades that it was impenetrable for most. But most of us felt like that was the way we had to do it. If I'm writing for the government, it has to sound a certain way in order to carry that sense of authority, in order to sound like what we think it's supposed to sound like. The reason the Plain Writing Act of 2010 finally became law as opposed to best practice is because of a pretty strong disconnect within government about what was considered good government writing. At the boots on the ground level, most people considered government writing to be this bureaucraties, this gobbledygook that we considered the right way to go, how to write in government. However, at many levels of leadership, they were looking for plain language. And I always like to show this example from 1942. This that you see on your screen here is a letter that was written by the Director of Civilian Defense. He was the Dean of Harvard Law School at the time, James Landis. Harvard keeps ending up in the news. And this was, of course, 1942 is wartime, bombing in London, making preparations here in the United States for whether that might happen here. And you'll see, you don't even have to read this letter to see that it's very long. It's a very long letter that was directions for what to do downtown Washington, D.C., should we ever be the subject of an air raid. And I'll just read just a little bit of it just to give you a taste of it. Such preparation shall be made as will completely obscure all federal buildings and non-federal buildings occupied by the federal government during an air raid for any period of time. I've just run out of breath even reading this. By visibility for reason of internal or external illumination. It just goes on and on like this. So imagine this letter is distributed, and we at that time were already having press conferences, presidential press conferences. So President Roosevelt was briefing the press and talking about this letter. And he's actually laughing at the letter. He's laughing at how wordy and circuitous and clunky the writing is. And he says to his press secretary, Rewrite that for me, will you? And they're laughing. And I should note that as he's reading it out loud, he's not only laughing at the letter, but also poking fun at it. That when he uses this part here where Landis talks about internal or external illumination, he says, I've seen some of you illuminated sometimes. So the press is just laughing. Everyone's having just a fest about this letter that just goes on and is hard to read and understand and process. And the president says, tell them the buildings will have to keep their work going, put something across the windows in the buildings that can afford it so work can be stopped for a while, turn out the lights and stop there. That's it. That's what the letter is trying to say there. I love to show this example because not only is it a great example of the difference between what we considered official government writing and plain language, it also shows that disconnect that I referred to, that levels of leadership at a high level at this point, obviously presidential level, are saying, hey, if you want to communicate effectively, use conversational English. We're not talking about slang, we're just talking about professional conversational English. And that is why plain writing matters, because we're trying to connect. You're trying to connect, you're trying to provide opportunities for your colleagues to connect with each other and to the client. And what we know about plain language is that it is clear communication and it does prevent misunderstandings, missed deadlines. It helps ensure that you're all on the same page about money, targets, goals. It helps ensure that you're all working toward the same goal. And by the way, it is also part of many of the core competencies that everyone is looking to ensure that they are able to use as they are climbing their career trajectory, as they're working along their career goals. The competencies that plain language and clear communication are clearly tied to are in the fundamental competencies, obviously oral and written communication. And when you're looking at the executive core competencies, it's all about leadership and results. So, one of the things people often ask me about plain writing and plain language is, if this is a law, then what happens if I don't? What happens if I feel like, hey, I can't use plain language because that's just not how my office operates, or that's not how how I learned how to write for the government. Is there something bad that can happen to me? So the truth is, the Plain Writing Act doesn't necessarily have a lot of legal teeth to it. Can you be sued if you don't use plain writing? I suppose it's possible. What what the goal really is for self-policing, and in fact, there is such thing as a plain writing report card. Let me go back for 1 second and talk about self-policing. You will hear it, and probably do, if clients, meaning members of the public, or even just internally, other people don't understand what you're talking about. Often, when your writing isn't clear, when you're answering a lot of questions, or you have incidents where you've got misunderstandings, it's because the writing is impenetrable. But there is also something called the plain writing report card. The plain writing report card is an assessment of all of the agencies every year that assesses external publications, external communication, and says, hey, how are you doing? Are you doing well or not? The Center for Plain Language is the organization teamed with the federal government that assesses every year key agencies and looks at some key criteria. Namely, can writers get what they need and find what they need? So they're looking at these areas here: purpose statements, terminology. They're looking for dense legal language that can confuse readers, whether there are clear and concrete examples and context, tools, direct links on the websites. They're looking for redundancies, circuitous and clunky writing. that make it hard for readers to figure out where's the information I came here looking for. So some of this has to do with website design, to be sure, but a lot of it also has to do with just being able to write in a clear and comprehensible manner. So again, the second bucket of criteria: can readers find what they need? Looking for logical organization, clear headings on websites, avoiding text-heavy formats, avoiding long, clunky paragraphs. One of the primary goals for plain language is to make the reading easy to process, meaning that we're looking at bullet points and numbered lists as opposed to long, clunky paragraphs. So I want to take a moment and ask all of you to assess some web pages here. I've got two slides. Slide A here, I'm going to give you a look at this. I'm going to give you a look at slide B, and then we're going to put up a poll question and ask you to compare the two slides with those criteria in mind. Which one of these slides, is the poll question you're about to get, is doing the best at meeting those criteria that I just listed, helping readers get what they find and find what they need. So here's slide A. I'll be quiet for a moment, let you just look at it. And here is slide B. I'll be quiet for a moment, let you look at that. All right, and if we can just go ahead and put that poll question up. Slide A or slide B, which makes it easy for readers to get what they need and find what they need? Back to A again for a moment here, just in case you need a refresher. And B.
All right, we have about 80% participated in the poll question, so be sure to click on A or B, and we will be ending the poll in just a minute. All right, we have 83 of 99 participated. Go ahead and hit your choice, and I'm going to close the poll. All right, right now it's 70% slide A and 30% slide B.
Okay. And the correct answer is, in fact, slide A. Slide A has simpler navigation and simpler writing that tells them right away. So the heading we note is reporting housing discrimination, and they address the issue right away. If you believe your rights have been violated, we encourage you to report housing discrimination. Very simple sentence. And then simple navigational tools following that brief paragraph that hits the highlights. This paragraph says, report it, make sure that you do it quickly. They say time limits, and here's what we want you to do. And then they give you very brief lines about snippets about the things that you need to report and icons that help visualize it as well. This one here is about special use permit application, but they don't begin by telling us quickly how to do what I'm doing. They do define what a special use authorization is. That's helpful. However, it's still confusing. And if I've come here to get a special use permit, I don't get that answer down until third heading down. And the fourth heading down, is my proposal appropriate, is a little bit to the side of what it is that a user is likely asking here. Appropriate is an odd word to use there. So slide A is the one that best fit the criteria. And here is the plain language federal report card for 2024. And you will note that slide A, that one came from our little poll here, that won our little poll, came from the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So that's line 4 on this list here. That's line 4. And in fact, HUD received an A this year from the Center for Plain Language. The second slide, the one that did not do as well, came from line 1, the Department of Agriculture, the Forest Service, getting a recreation special use permit. Their grade was C minus. C minus. So as you can see, they don't necessarily assess every single agency. Every year they choose the agencies that have the highest public interface, the highest need from members of the public. So there are some that, of course, get assessed every single year. HHS, HUD, Labor, Homeland Security, State every year. And their grades have really fluctuated throughout the years. One thing I have noticed over the years is that the grades overall have been going up. This year there were no Fs. There have been Fs before. There have absolutely been Fs. In 2019, there were 3 or 4 Fs. So overall, the grades are going up, but it's an interesting resource for you as training officers to see where your agency is coming in this federal report card. And the source for these report cards is at the Center for Plain Language. So note, I've got that URL here on this slide. I understand you'll be able to watch a recording of this later on. But you can always just Google Center for Plain Language Federal Report Card, and you can see the history of report cards and a little bit more of a deep dive on this watchdog organization. This watchdog organization is also partnered with ensuring that the plainlanguage.gov website is up to date. So the question is always, all right, if plain language is so important, and if I need to be able to do it, and my colleagues and my agency needs to be able, all of the people involved in my world need to be able to write in plain language because it is such a foundational skill, how do I do it? That website that I just mentioned is a key resource. It is the book, so to speak, in how to write in plain language. So the URL for that website is here. It is the landing place for the history of the Plain Language Act. It is the landing place for exercises, training videos, etc. And most importantly, it's the landing place for the federal plain language guidelines. And for lack of any other way to describe them, those are the rules. The federal plain language guidelines are the rules for how to write in plain language. If you are doing each of these things that you see on the screen here, you can be reasonably sure that you have been able to write in plain language. So your goals are to write for your audience, be organized, choose your words carefully, along with being concise and conversational. Designing for reading makes it readable. So the difference between that HUD web page that we saw with the icons that helped the reader understand what each sentence was about, that was more readable, considered more readable than the text dense page from the Forest Department. Following web standards and testing your assumptions have to do also, the web standards also have to do with making things simple to read and easily navigatable, making sure that they are accessible with the Americans with Disabilities Act as well. And testing your assumptions means always making sure that you have published material information that you've thought through critically and that meets the test of ensuring that your logic is strong. So, in a quick webinar like this, we just give you a brief overview of some of these guidelines and what they really mean, a little bit of deeper digging into what they mean. Beginning with the idea of writing for your audience, we talk a lot about reader centric writing, and a couple of quick notes about plain writing and writing for your reader. A lot of folks, when they think about conversational English and this goal to write in conversational English, will often say, oh, that just means, dumb it down, keep it simple. Yes, keep it simple, but don't dumb it down. That's the opposite, really. The goal when you're writing for your reader is to be a writer who understands, who takes the time to understand who your reader is, thinking about what language they speak. And by language, I mean what subject matter expertise are you writing for and what size group are you writing for? Is it a general audience where the subject matter expertise may be varied? Or is it a specific audience of a smaller group of people and all of you speak that same so called language? If you are IT and you're writing for other IT folks, then by all means use that terminology because you speak the same language. You're not trying to dumb it down for people who are at that same expertise level as you. But if you are speaking to people who specialize in things other than IT, then you don't want to get yourself bogged down in constantly having to define terms. That means people get lost along the way. They're trying to remember terms, they're trying to keep up with you. So, keeping it simple, yes. Keeping it dumb, no. People know when they're being talked down to, and you'll lose your reader that way just as much as you would lose them by using complicated terminology. Write with your end goal in mind, meaning that when people say bluff, bottom line up front, what they really mean is it's okay to tell people what your conclusion is right there in the open. The primary question you're always trying to answer for yourself as a writer and also for your reader is, what do I need from my reader? What do I need them to know, do, or believe? That answer is your bluff. It's your main point. And a lot of writers will find themselves trying to avoid saying it in the open because they're afraid of being repetitive. And so, one of the things that we encourage you to do in keeping with this concept of writing for your reader is be okay with that repetition. It's okay. It's okay to set the table for your reader. Let them know what they're reading and what you need from them. You can say right away, it's important that we consider appropriating more money for a daycare center in the office. Or, as training officers, you could say it's important that we consider allocating more training of our training budget to writing classes, offering 3 writing classes instead of 2 this year. That sounds like a conclusion, and it is, but it allows you to then make your case and then conclude it again. That's your end goal in mind, and tell them why they care. Tell them why it matters to them, not why it matters to you, but why it matters to them. So that's a quick overview of why we would want to write with our reader in mind. But just to explore that thought a little bit, we've got another poll question. And our goal is with this poll question to choose which sentence writes with the reader in mind. So as you read these, note the reader is going to be national park visitors. Which one of these sentences speaks to the reader?
Please go ahead and make your selection. Right now, we're at 83% participated. So if you still see that poll up there, go ahead and make your selection. All right, Heather, we're at 98%. The second, the please throw away your trash so we can all enjoy our clean, beautiful space. So 98% have selected that one. And
Beautiful.
yeah,
Good. Thank you so much. And
you're
yes, of
welcome.
course, that is the correct answer because we certainly do want to make sure that the cleaning staff is not unduly burdened with picking up your sandwich wrappers. But when you're writing with people in mind, your reader in mind, you're thinking about what matters to them. So we think about uh, writing with your reader in mind, thinking about why they win. So you win if you are creating a training schedule in your office that meets the highest need because you create a stronger employee workforce, a more efficient, more effective, better communicators, whatever it is, whatever need you have in mind, that's what it is that you are able to communicate right away with them in mind. And that is part of the big picture question that we're talking about of keeping your reader in mind. Good. Thank you, everybody. So another of the federal plain language guidelines has to do with organization. And there's a lot to the concept of organization. Some of it structuring your written product using three-part structure, open, middle, close, that kind of thing. And when we drill down to the sentence level organization, one of the important elements of that organizing your information has to do with literally how do we structure that sentence. And what the plain language guidelines encourage you to do is consider starting with the main idea first and then cover your exceptions afterward. And that is a point that shows up in the guidelines because, for reasons that I don't think anyone truly understands, one of the hallmarks of government writing seems to be that government writing often starts with the exceptions first before getting to the main point. And so this is the clarion call here for let's start with that topic sentence, that main idea, and then come to the exceptions. We will schedule a hearing on your application. That's the main thing we want you to hear and to understand, unless or except when, and then there are all of the exceptions and the conditions. So now that I've said that, I will also say that English is interesting. And for every time we give you one best practice, we will also give you an exception to that best practice. And here is this exception to the best practice. And it's sometimes you will, and I'm sure you have all been thinking this in your head right now, but what about this, Heather? Well, there are for sure sometimes when the exception can aid in clarity. So if you've got that situation where your exception's just a few words, helps avoid misunderstanding them, by all means put it first. Unless you've already submitted an up-to-date resume, you must submit a resume containing all of this other information. So the test for you trying to decide is always going to be whether that exception really is just a few words. If your exception is long and involves exceptions to exceptions and conditions, it should go last. And those kinds of things are worth taking a second look at when you are reviewing your own writing, especially when you are somebody who is doing procedure, standard operating procedure, instructions. Those are the kinds of documents that often suffer from poor organization and make it difficult for people to follow because of those sentence structures. So we have yet another poll question. based on what it is that we just talked about. How are we doing on our answers?
We're at about 80% right now, and the clear winner is number one with, well, 85% and 15% for the second
Excellent. Okay.
paragraph.
Okay, thank you for that. Yes, A is definitely the winner. You can keep your current health plan provided it still meets the minimum coverage requirements. So that one, definitely putting the main idea first, you can keep, and then there are some exceptions to it. Um, so often in policy, it's more nuanced than that. So again, I'm saying the takeaway here for that kind of sentence structure and that kind of examination of a sentence is how long is my exception? If my exception is longer than the rule itself, then I'm going to want to put the main point first. That will be the easiest way to ensure clarity. Also, breaking sentences down when there are too many exceptions in a row. All right, a couple more notes about plain writing, trying to hit a couple other sweet spots here in the federal plain language guidelines. Choosing your words carefully, find ways to use single words and short words. Examples here, uh, and these are real examples, if the state secretary finds that an individual has received a payment to which the individual was not entitled, whether or not the payment was due to the individual's fault or misrepresentation, the individual shall be liable to repay. I mean, my eyes spin every time I read that. I have no idea what they're trying to say. However, what we look at when we follow these goals to tighten it up is what's really going on. If the state agency finds you received a payment you weren't entitled to, you must pay the entire sum back. So we're not talking about dumb words here. We're not saying see Jane jump, but we are saying that it's possible to say instead of has received a payment to which the individual was not entitled. We're looking at a sentence there that's written in passive voice. That is what we call a circumlocution, meaning a description of what's going on instead of the actual word itself. And what they have to do, liable to repay, instead of saying you must pay the entire sum back. Being conversational means using simple tenses. We don't need to use all of the 12 tenses in the English language in government writing. Most of the time, simple present will do. Of course, there are times when you have to write in the simple past or in the simple future. But again, I've talked a lot about the hallmarks of government writing. The hallmark of government writing tends to want to talk in would have been doing, conditional tenses, and past perfect and present perfect, has been having. Most of the time, you don't need those. Simple tenses will do it for you. And contractions are okay to use as well. So I know that if you've been writing for the government for a long time, you started your career being told that you can never use contractions because it's too informal and it's inappropriate. Things change. We're in the middle of massive change right now. This change started a little while ago. And that was the acceptance and the understanding that in conversational English, we use a blend of the spelled out version and a contraction. In one sentence, I may say, you, the rain isn't coming down very hard, but I hear that tomorrow it is not going to happen at all. All right, I just made that sentence up off the top of my head, so it's a little weird. But the point is that without thinking about it, we blend our use of contractions. And so the goal is, again, being conversational to make your writing as accessible and easy to process. You want it to sound like someone's actually listening to somebody talk. And that means you are doing things like using contractions. You're also doing things like, note here, I've gone back to my previous slide, note that we're using personal pronouns. So I say that to you carefully because there are times when it's great to use a personal pronoun, and there are times when it sounds like you're blaming somebody. So if took money from the State Department, you must pay it back. That sounds a little bit blamey. But you can certainly say, if we discover you received a payment you weren't entitled to, you must pay the sum back. That is another way to consider using those personal pronouns. Specifically, not precisely, but specifically online. If you are somebody who is looking to revamp the FAQ page on a website, consider using personal pronouns to make it clear who's talking and who's the person who's reading the question. Must I include all this information in my complaint? That's the question. And the answer is yes, you must include all the information in your complaint. Use the word you instead of applicants or the undersigned or any of those ways of not saying you. We design for reading mostly these days by breaking down heavy text paragraphs into bullets and numbers, using simple, consistent typography and plenty of white space. And I'll give you a moment to compare those two examples there that are taken from the Plain Language website. So you'll note here that they have broken that heavy text paragraph down into two numbers, 1 and 2, and then given sub bullets within that 1. All right, poll question 5. Once again, comparing two sentences to see which sentence is in plain language to the best of your guessing or knowledge already.
All right, we're almost to 80% here. So we have 81% responded with a 98% for the second sentence and 2% for the first one.
Okay, beautiful. So thank you to those of you who answered sentence B. In fact, that is plain language. The committee decided to fund the program. It's a sentence that's in the active voice that avoids what we call hidden verbs, which I know I didn't talk about, but also avoids words that are vague, implementation, funding for the program. The committee decided to fund the program. Simple, active voice, fewer words. I want to be clear, fewer words is almost always good. Sometimes it's not. Sometimes you don't want to cut out all the words if it means that you're losing the meaning of a sentence. And that topic of achieving conciseness without losing clarity is an important one when we are taking longer dives than this. We have an hour to talk about this today, but I want to be clear that that is actually a really important part of learning how to write clearly and effectively, is that discovery of how do I do that? How do I bridge that gap between conciseness and clarity? But the primary reason that the sentence B was the better plain language sentences because it was written in the active voice and it got rid of some of the extra language that was unnecessary. Okay. So with that, we've got about 10 minutes left here before we open up for questions, and I want to make sure we spend plenty of time answering the questions. I've been seeing the chat with, I haven't seen what's in the chat, but I've seen that there are some items there, so I want to make sure we get to them. But I want to talk a little bit about AI because how do we not these days, right? AI is the genie is out of the bottle at this point, not going to go back in. So how do we use AI to strengthen our writing presence, our writing product, without falling into any of the problematic areas that AI does present for us? So I want to take a look at why we care about AI other than the obvious, or let me just say, let me articulate what is the obvious, and that is that there are times when you sit there and you think, oh, I've just got to, respond to this email, and I need to have the same email that goes out to a whole bunch of people, and it'll take 30 seconds. If I ask AI to do this for me, it may take 15 or 20 minutes for me to draft it myself. There's an obvious time saving element there. Uh, AI can often be a good place to go to for improving your grammar. And it certainly can analyze large volumes of past correspondence if you tell it to. If you can say, take a look at these pieces of correspondence, identify patterns, provide insights, you can improve your own communication presence by using AI. And those are some of the things that I just mentioned there. So I'll just give you a chance to take a look at those notes about the pros for using AI in your correspondence. But there are some cons. AI doesn't get everything right. And it can be tricky because AI is built to write with authority. So it can make it sound like it's absolutely right, but unless you are a subject matter expert in the thing that you've asked AI to write about, it could very easily spit out something that is wrong. And maybe not outright wrong, but just shades enough of wrong to make you look like you don't know what you're talking about. So that doesn't necessarily mean it's a black and white thing where, oh, we can't use AI. It means that you do have to vet it carefully and know enough about the subject matter yourself in order to know when something isn't quite right or when it hasn't phrased something quite right. Another con with AI is that you are claiming that something is your written product when it isn't. And it also can sometimes mean that you're losing your own ability to write if you're relying on AI to do everything for you. It is a skill that is still going to be important for you to maintain. And just like with anything, the over reliance on a support means that we stop having to do it ourselves, which means we're not exercising that muscle. So, this is part of the goal of many of the offices and departments that have issued AI guidance to say, hey, let's recognize what can be really valuable here with this without necessarily saying, okay, we're going to use it so much that we are A, not being transparent about the fact that we use it, or B, lose the skills that we will still need to have as professional adults. So, with our next poll question, what I'm going to do is once again show you two slides and ask you to decide which one was written by AI.